I'll just say something about why I chose, as Adam has explained why he has chosen the things he's chosen. I'll say something about why I've chosen for this occasion at Boston College. I'm grateful to Professor Carney and Adam Fitzgerald and his colleagues for bringing it about. Why I've chosen something for voice, image and place that is Eliot, and that will lead into poetries of the stranger, because that's what we've been thinking about. So I just remind you that from beginning to end, Eliot's poems were fascinated by strangers. Morning at the Window, from his first book of poems, through to his last poem, effectively, Little Gidding, at the end of 4 quartets. Now, one kind of hospitality is hospitality to things like verse forms. Do you want me to be somewhere else?
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get the light right, because... There we go.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. I wasn't sure whether I was doing it. One kind of hospitality would be hospitality to verse forms. That is, they're not a stranger to you, but Morning at the Window is an adaptation of a Spenserian stanza. That is, it doesn't look like it, but it's 9 lines ending with an Alexandrine. It doesn't have a rhyme scheme of that, but part of its history is this odd pause which the Spenserian stanza can give you. It's about a stranger. It's about a stranger whose sex or gender you don't even know, because a passerby, even one with muddy skirts, may be a man or maybe a woman. And the language permits of your not saying anything about that, whereas if you were to paint it, it would either be a man or a woman or be indeterminate. But actually the word passerby is not indeterminate. It's not that you can't tell which it is, it doesn't tell you which it is, which is a different thing. As the word child doesn't tell you whether the person in question is a boy or a girl. And there's no pictorial equivalent to the word child, therefore, because if you show something that's a child, you're showing it to be not a boy or a girl, and that's not what the word child does. Morning at the Window. They're rattling breakfast plates in basement kitchens, and along the trampled edges of the street, I am aware of the damp souls of housemaids sprouting despondently at area gates. The brown waves of fog toss up to me twisted faces from the bottom of the street, and tear from a passer-by with muddy skirts an aimless smile that hovers in the air and vanishes along the level of the roofs. With along being a word that often draws your attention to an Alexandrine. When Pope wants to teach you about an Alexandrine, he'll bring the word along into it, partly because there was a joke about it being longer than the basic English line, but of course being the French basic line. So this is a stranger with whom you have this strange. Eliot loves thinking of stranger as partly more strange. The word doesn't have the word stranger in it, but he's very alert to the stranger as something that is more strange than the ordinarily strange. And of course he's aware, especially later, of the way in which l'étranger both is and is not the same as a stranger. That is the question of the stranger who is a foreigner, is not just foreign to you personally, but from a foreign land. Immense lot going on in this tiny poem, and he returns to it in 4 quartets with the same structure. I haven't given you the poem, forgive me, but with the same structure of ending each line with a prepositional phrase. It feels as if it rhymes, but it's actually a syntactical rhyming in kitchens, of the street, of housemaids, at area gates, to me, of the street, if anyone, with muddy skirts, in the air, on the roofs. So that what you've got along the roofs, what you've got is this very strange feeling of a very strict pattern, which is then not obviously a sound pattern, but is a syntactical pattern. And he refers to that in the absolutely lovely lines about the nursery bedrooms. I mean, those lines later in 4 quartets. But what I want to go to is Little Gidding, of which I think you have a copy. Now, what we all know is that it's entertaining a hospital. It wants to be hospitable to terza rima. It doesn't know how to do that, and he comes up with this very extraordinary device, as simple as you could possibly be, of alternating feminine and masculine endings. So that morning is a feminine ending, and night is a masculine ending, unending is a feminine ending, and he quite brilliantly gives you the first feminine endings be ings, so that you're attuned. That is 1, 3, 5, because it's feminine into masculine, a morning, unending, and homing, where of course morning is not a participle. So they're all ings, but they're not the same kind of ing as you go through it. And he revised in order to create this. He didn't the earlier version drafts of Little Gidding don't have it. And it returns, at the very end, it returns, of course, with refining fire where it's lodged within the line. So that what happens is that something which had commanded the ends of the lines, actually he moves out of it, but does not entirely abandon it in the very late stages of this. So thinking about numbers, he's going to move into terza rima. He gives you 3 stanzas, first of all, which of course, though they are Dantesque, they are no relation to Dante's verse form. They're 3 stanzas for the 4 elements. So you immediately got some strange movement of mind, and it looks as if they should each get one. This is the death of air, this is the death of earth, but then this is the death of water and fire. And it's not just that it's like an air letter and he's run out of space. You have to think about what is it that makes him wish to compact water and fire as he doesn't wish to compact the other elements. So there are questions of numbers and interchange of numbers starting immediately. And there's then the passage in terza rima. Now I want to read it and then say something about just one aspect of it, which I think is important to this occasion and perhaps to this venue. Of course, I've chosen Eliot because he's the greatest Anglo-Catholic poet that we've got, and those of us who are English believe that Anglo-Catholicism has its merits. The religion is not mine, I hasten to add. I read Eliot as somebody with whom I am profoundly unsympathetic when it comes to Christianity in general and his Christianity in particular. But we have literature, as William Manson says, to give us sympathetic access to systems of belief that are not our own. And there are only 2 ways in which we ever get that, and one is through people that we are fond of, our family and our friends, and the other is through works of art. This is how you get sympathetic access to systems of belief that are not your own. My oldest child, who's 50, when I asked him about the village in which he lives with his wife in England, I said, "Has the vicar called on you?" So David, who is a severe figure, said to me, "No, but since the subject has come up, I ought perhaps to tell you that I have been received into the Church of England." Judge of my astonishment. I'd given him a perfectly healthy upbringing. So I extended my hand, took him by the hand, and I have access to a system of belief that is not my own. But this is one of the 2 ways in which we do it. It's through works of art. And it's one of the sad things about recent times that works of art have been increasingly valued for our concurring with them. That is, something is a great work of art if it shares your convictions and realizes them very well for you. Now, that's one way in which works of art are great, but they're also great in exactly the opposite way. I mean, I admire, within limits, Hopkins, but because it's an striking demonstration of a view of the world that I can't imagine myself holding. Do you see what I'm wanting to get at in this? So I'll read the Dantesque passage. What we all know is that it combines Brunetto Latini, who is in the Inferno, with Arnaud Daniel, who is in Purgatory. And the question I want to attend to briefly after reading it is, at what point does that transition happen, and what exactly is going on when Eliot does this? In the uncertain hour before the morning, near the ending of interminable night, at the recurrent end of the unending, after the dark dove with the flickering tongue had passed below the horizon of his homing, while the dead leaves still rattled on like tin over the asphalt where no other sound was, between 3 districts whence the smoke arose, I met one walking, loitering and hurried, as if blown towards me like the metal leaves before the urban dawn wind unresisting. And as I fixed upon the downturned face that pointed scrutiny with which we challenged the first met stranger in the waning dusk, I caught the sudden look of some dead master, whom I had known, forgotten, half recalled, both one and many. In the brown-baked features, the eyes of a familiar compound ghost, both intimate and unidentifiable. So I assumed a double part, and cried and heard another's voice cry, "What are you here?" Although we were not. I was still the same, knowing myself, yet being someone other, and he a face still forming, yet the words sufficed to compel the recognition they preceded. And so, compliant to the common wind, 2 strange to each other for misunderstanding, in concord at this intersection time of meeting nowhere, no before and after, we trod the pavement in a dead patrol. I said, "The wonder that I feel is easy, yet ease is cause of wonder. Therefore speak, I may not comprehend, may not remember. And he, I am not eager to rehearse my thought and theory which you have forgotten. These things have served their purpose, let them be. So with your own, and pray they be forgiven by others, as I pray you to forgive both bad and good. Last season's fruit is eaten, and the full-fed beast shall kick the empty pail. For last year's words belong to last year's language, and next year's words await another voice. But as the passage now presents no hindrance to the spirit unappeased and peregrine, between two worlds become much like each other, so I find words I never thought to speak, in streets I never thought I should revisit, when I left my body on a distant shore. Since our concern was speech, and speech impelled us to purify the dialect of the tribe and urge the mind to aftersight and foresight, let me disclose the gifts reserved for age, to set a crown from your lifetime's effort. First, the cold friction of expiring sense without enchantment, offering no promise but bitter tastelessness of shadow fruit, as body and soul begin to fall asunder. Second, the conscious impotence of rage at human folly, and the laceration of laughter at what ceases to amuse. And last, the rending pain of reenactment of all that you have done and been, the shame of motives late revealed, and the awareness of things ill done, and done to others harm, which once you took for exercise of virtue. Then fool's approval stings, and honour stains. From wrong to wrong the exasperated spirit proceeds, unless restored by that refining fire where you must move in measure, like a dancer. The day was breaking. In the disfigured street he left me with a kind of valediction and faded on the blowing of the horn. I think Eliot's genius nowhere more elegant than his work within that, and I think it very wrong of Geoffrey Hill, a poet and a person whom I greatly admire and respect, that Geoffrey can speak denigratingly all the time of four quartets and never attend to that passage at all. I think Geoffrey has a duty to say why that is it's sort of virtually indistinguishable from the Eliot of the plays, which is the view that Geoffrey has taken. Very, very challenging and important essays recently, but I think crucially inattentive to this particular passage. Now, I've been writing about the matter I'm talking about in the book on Anthony Hecht, Geoffrey Hill, and Robert Lowell under the sign of Eliot and Pound. So it's about the relation of those three poets to Eliot and Pound in certain respects. So this bit is, as it were, from that. So at some point in the Eliot sequence, Brunetto modulates into Arno. And it's very important to know when, because one of them is in the Inferno and the other is in Purgatory. And you may think it doesn't make much difference, but if you're there, you will think it does. And so what actually is happening in this passage? What are you here? Now, so it's very, very closely based on Dante, there's no question about it, and the manuscripts, you'll remember, had Sir Brunetto. Are you here, Sir Brunetto? The brown-baked features keep the name going of Brunetto simply through brown-baked features and so on, which is Dante, but Dante tightened for those particular purposes. So, if we take it back to Dante, what's the sequence of thought and identification? There's a very good, I think, Strand, the general editor, so I have a vested interest in praising it, but there's a very good Dante volume, Dante in English, edited by Eric Griffiths and Matthew Reynolds, translations of Dante over the centuries from English and American poets. And they're very careful to annotate this Eliot section, as they also annotate Lowell's translation of the Brunetto Latini episode. Great Lowell, I think. I think one of his greatest translations. So they want to establish a moment at which it moves from being Brunetto to being Arno, and I think they're right to think that's very important. I don't think they're persuasive about it. So these things have served their purpose, let them be. So with your own, and pray they be forgiven by others, as I pray you to forgive both bad and good. So that's a wonderful movement of mind, both bad and good. So they have a note. Prayer for forgiveness is unknown in the Inferno. So that's clear for them. That means at that point it has to be purgatorial and not infernal. But the trouble is that they have another note of a parallel passage that they give for Eliot earlier. So the earlier bit is 3 or 4 lines after, what are you here? So you're still unquestionably within the Brunetto moments, do you see what I'm saying? And it's a dozen lines before those about forgiveness, and it's this: "A dear face still forming, yet the words sufficed to compel the recognition they preceded." And Eliot gets into a discussion with John Hayward about the word preceded, and he stands firm very beautifully, and Eliot says, "I mean to be aware that it is someone you know, and to be surprised by his being there before you have identified him." And it's a very beautiful gloss on it. I mean, you don't need the gloss in the sense that if we'd been imagined enough, we would have seen it's truly in the writing, but the gloss is terrifically helpful, I think. So the recognition they preceded. So Eric Griffiths and Matthew Reynolds have a note saying, "Compare Purgatorio 23." So this is the translation by Lawrence Binion that Ezra Pound so beautifully admired and so touchingly improved, don't I think? And what one needs is that later edition by Agenda published, which has all the final revisions that Lawrence Binion made. So this is the moment. Him, from his aspect, that I'd never guessed, but in his voice was given to me the clue of what was in his countenance suppressed. So that moment they relate, you see what I'm saying? They relate that parallel passage, and I think they're completely convincing about it, not to something within the Arno Daniel section, but within the Brunetto Latini section. In other words, that moment is purgatorial, but is Brunetto in purgatory at that point? Why is it a purgatorial parallel passage that you want? And so on. So is there a pivotal moment or not? Now, if you look at the manuscript, Helen Gardner's wonderful book on the composition of four quartets, you see that there are three lines that are clearly not of the Inferno, but of Purgatory. You can look up the textual details, and they immediately precede the Dantesque vision. That is, you have a hat on an old man's sleeve. You then have these three lines, which are not, I'm afraid, on the sheet we didn't publish. Fire without and fire within shall purge the unidentified sin. This is the place where we begin. And then this Dantesque section begins. And he quite rightly didn't use those lines. We think about the quality of those lines and the fact you don't actually want three bits here. You want the elements in three stanzas, the four elements of three stanzas, and then you want the strange adaptation of Terza Rima, and the point where three roads come together, as in a lot of untrivial places. So the question that I've got and I've written about in the book is there any reason to think that Eliot is relenting and actually wishing, as Dante does, but as Dante will not permit himself to believe, that Brunetto Latini is in purgatory, not in the Inferno. Eliot wrote, you remember, very touchingly about the Brunetto Latini episode. He kept coming back to it. All his essays on there, and there are many essays, many more than just the book, the Times Literary Supplement pieces that he did it himself there. Brunetto's excellence in damnation. It's a wonderful use of the preposition. Excellence in, I mean, even while damned, or excellence in damnation. I think he gets a first in damnation. He only got a 2-2 or a B- in salvation. And so, Brunetto's excellence in damnation, so admirable a soul, and so perverse. That's Eliot on it. Again, excellence in damnation. Now, Eliot, I think, is then moved by having said that to reassert his general position on Dante, which is that we must not sentimentalize Dante. He doesn't want a liberal humanist Dante. In this, he's like Kenelm Foster, though nicer than Father Kenelm Foster on these matters. The emotion of the person, or the emotion with which our attitude appropriately invests the person, is never lost or diminished, is always reserved entire, but is modified by the position assigned to the person in the eternal scheme, is coloured by the atmosphere of that person's residence in one of the three worlds. And then he moves to compare. Now, the three worlds, the question is Brunetto Latini actually in two worlds? And is Dante in some way actually, is Eliot in some way in two minds? Dante is torn, but is completely convinced about where it is that Brunetto Latini is. There's not some sort of limbo for people who may or may not make it. I know limbos have been under a cloud lately and are being abolished faster than one can mention them, really. It seemed to me that they did save a lot of appearances, and there's a lot to be said for them. But it's true, I'm not a believer, so it might be flippant to me to say that. But limbos have given a lot of pause, haven't they, to people of late and so on. So Dante is able to depict pride, Eliot says, and exhibit its worldly grandeur simultaneously with its simple sinfulness, The damnation of the damned in Dante's hell consists chiefly in this, that they remain fixed in eternity, the passions which have damned them, and so on. There's not one that is not shown as reprehensible. But whether reprehensibility means purgatory or means the inferno does seem to me a crucial question. And I think that when you look closely at this passage, I'll not say more about it, you will find that there's good reason to think that Eliot does not come out for the clarity of this soul being in one world or the other. It's not Arnold's hovering between two worlds, and so wandering or hovering between two worlds, one powerless, one dead, the other powerless to be born. It's not quite that. It is a feeling that however much you admire Dante, you can't any longer perhaps partake of Dante's confidence in allocations. That is, Dante clearly is quite unmisgiving about these allocations, as he had better be. I mean, it is required of him by the system to which he adheres that there not be any sort of grey areas. But I think the Eliot lines are full of grey area. And they're that part of use of Pound, if I bring it back to what Adam was talking about. Eliot associates Pound with damnation all the time. The greatest page and a half in After Strange Gods, the book which Eliot would not reprint because he quite rightly repudiated a great deal that it said, especially its anti-Semitism, which is unquestionable in that book. There are questions about Eliot's anti-Semitism, but not about After Strange Gods, not about what it says, makes any large number of free-thinking Jews undesirable. And the word undesirable there is a terrible, terrible word to have as late as 1933, 1934, and so on. But Eliot repents of the book, does not allow it to be reprinted, does not allow it to be used in the Lady Chatterley trial, where they wished to call him as a witness in order to prosecute the book, and he refused, and he said, that it's not written down anywhere, he said, I was sick when I wrote the book, and so on. But it does have a wonderful page and a half about Ezra Pound and damnation, and the terrible problem of damnation, that is that it always seems to be hell for the other people, not for oneself or one's friends. So that part of my argument in this book that I've written is that going into the familiar compound ghost is Pound. That is, the word compound is compounded partly of the unforgettability always for Eliot of Ezra Pound. Especially if you're thinking about air raids during the war. The place of opposition to fascism, this is after all, this is about air raids. And there is Eliot as an air raid ward, among other things. It's a terrifically patriotic. This is a series of patriotic war poems. Burnt Norton is about the fact that we're going to have one unless we're very, very lucky. It's 1935, 1936, and the others are all patriotic war poems of different kinds. So I think Pound is very strongly present in this section, and I think that Eliot is partly wishing to be able to forgive Pound, and partly wishing to be able to forgive himself. That is, the things ill done, and done to others harm, which once you took for exercise of virtue. And that includes class attitudes, misogynistic attitudes, anti-Semitic attitudes, so that it's as if you might amend the Wordsworthian thought, oh mercy to myself I cried, into oh mercy to myself I cried. Eliot found it very difficult to be merciful to himself, and this passage I think is about such a yearning. Thank you very much.
I learned so much, and I've been teaching LA for 40 years, so. Okay, I'm going to be reading, what I'm going to be doing is giving some comments about the idea of a strange meeting, and then I'm going to read a few of my own poems. Strange meeting indeed, meeting like this in a place like hell, confronting the man you ran through with a bayonet the night before. Wilfred Owen would have found the title for his poem in his copy of Shelley, there in that strange, neglected poem, The Revolt of Islam. The speaker, himself run through with a spear, looks up to find the other, the stranger, stricken with horror at what he has just done. And one, whose spear had pierced me, leaned beside with quivering lips and humid eyes, and all seemed like some brothers on a journey wide gone forth, whom now strange meeting did befall, in a strange land round one whom they might call their friend, their chief, their father. Might have, in another time and another place. One encounters the other, the compound, familiar ghost, the one fears, the enemy, met now in a nightmare, phosphorescent sleep, in the rat-infested trenches of the Great War. The other, in this instance a man without a name, whom he has killed in battle, in a place where ignorant armies clash by night. Perhaps the speaker is dead himself now, or drugged with exhaustion, and the Dantesque landscape of two worlds, hell and France, become much like one another. Perhaps it is a nightmare only, from which he will awaken to find himself back in a living hell. In any event, it is the time between, the time in which to let the other finally have his say, as there was no time in the epic sweep of battle when the man tried to parry the blow, or was too terrified to do so, or perhaps too tired, wanting it over, wanting the long sleep so long denied him. Nothing has been lost. The speaker tries to assuage the stranger, whom he recognizes as both stranger and as friend. Nothing except my life, and what I might have done, and what I might have warned against, the other says. And now we realize that the other is the self, speaking one's own deepest dreams deferred now forever. Like Owen, who would take a machine gun bullet to the forehead as he tried to get his boys across the canal that November 1918, in the last days of the war. Like a tired mother hovering over her little ones, the man he killed would likewise have gone, and then quoting, hunting wild after the wildest beauty in the world, which lies not calm in eyes or braided hair, but mocks the steady running of the hour. And if it grieves, grieves richlier than here. For by my glee might many men have laughed, and of my weeping something had been left, which must die now. I mean the truth untold, the pity of war, the pity war distilled. Now men will go content with what we spoiled, or discontent, spoiled bloody and be spilled. I am the enemy you killed, my friend. I knew you in this dark, for so you frowned yesterday through me as you jabbed and killed. I parried, but my hands were loath and cold. Let us sleep now. John Berryman, a.k.a. Henry House, likewise meeting the dead there in the night reaches. In this instance, his friend and adversary, the poet-critic Randall Jarrell, dead at 51, young even for that age of lost poets, though not as young as either Platt or Sexton. There's a small chance that Randall's death was an accident, a chastened Robert Lowell wrote his friend Elizabeth Bishop a week after Jarrell walked into a speeding car in an underpass weeks after cutting his wrists. But I think it was suicide, and so does everyone else who knew him well. In the night reaches, dreamed he of better graces, Berryman writes, having in his mind's eye entered the long tunnels now of death himself. The struggle at long last over, in death, he can dream too of hosting the compound familiar ghost of Randall and Yeats and Rethke and so many others who have preceded him down the familiar passageway into the unfamiliar world of liberations and beloved faces, such as now ere dawn he sings. It would not be easy, accustomed to these things, to give up the old world, but he could try. Let it all rest. Have a good cry. Let Randall rest, whom your self-torturing cannot restore one instant's good to rest. He's left us now. The panic died, and in the panic's dying, so did my old friend. I am headed west also somehow. In the chambers of the end, we'll meet again. I will say Randall. He'll say pussycat. And all will be as before, when as we sought among the beloved faces eminence, and were dissatisfied with that, and needed more. Father Hopkins, years earlier, where years are mere winks into eternity, as the prophet Hart Crane sang, there in his bleak cell-like room in the third story of the makeshift school off St. Stephen's Green, parrying with the other, the stranger, Jacob's angel, or something far more terrifying. I'll not carry in comfort despair, not feast on thee, not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me, or most weary cry, I can no more. I can something, hope, wish day come, not choose not to be. But oh thou terrible, why wouldst thou root on me thy ring-whirled right foot rock? Lay a lion limb against me, scan with darksome devouring eyes my bruised bones, and fan, in turns of tempest, me heap there, me frantic to avoid thee, and flee. Why? That my chaff might fly, my grain lie sheer and clear. Nay, in all that toil, that coil, since seems I kissed the rod, hand rather, my heart low, lacked strength, stole joy, would laugh, cheer. Cheer whom, though? The hero whose heaven-handling flung me, foot trod me, or me that fought him? Oh, which one? Is it each one? That night, that year of now done darkness, I, wretch, lay wrestling with my God, my God. A cat and mouse game, then, something in the priest rebelling with that rebel will of his against whom? The enemy? The stranger? The friend? His own dark doppelganger? The crucified Christ, hanging by his mangled hands from the rugged crossbeam? Coming out of the darkness of the long night to catch himself likewise nailed and broken? Uttering the opening line of the 42nd Psalm, the Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? Uttered now first as a swearing cry of pain, and then as a sign of utter amazement, the words chiming perfectly with his master's in this reenactment of the crucified self. Seamus Heaney's pilgrim on Station Island, after the long fast and the prayers, suddenly coming across his dead friend, one more victim of the old wars between Protestant and Catholic in Northern Ireland 30 years ago. In lines of exquisite terzarima, Heaney invokes the shock and terror of seeing his dead friend standing there at the edge of the water, between two worlds. Easy now, the persona says, still carrying the open wound to his head, and tries to calm Heaney. It's only me. You've seen men as raw after a football match. And so with Homer, and so with Virgil and Propertius and Seneca down the ages, and so with Dante, as the familiar dead across the waters comfort even as they terrify in the strange narcotic plush of the poem's hypnotic music. Or on the lighter side, this riff on the landscapes of the afterlife by old friend Henry, sharing a martini with St. Peter at the pearly gates before the verdict is read aloud and the landscape undergoes a radical shift. Peter's not friendly. He gives me sideways looks. The architecture is far from reassuring. I feel uneasy. A pity. The interview began so well. I mentioned fiendish things. He waved them away and sloshed out a martini, strangely needed. We spoke of indifferent matters. God's hell, the vague hell of the Congo, John's energy, antimatter matter. I felt fine. Then a change came backward. A chill fell. Talk slackened, died, and began to give me sideways looks. Christ, I thought, what now? And would have asked for another, but didn't dare. I feel my application failing. It's growing dark. Some other sound is overcoming. His last words are, we betrayed me. whoever the we is here, whoever the me, as pronominal references themselves undergo a terrifying metamorphosis into death's dissolution. For 3 months now, I have been coming back to several recent poems of my own, thinking of these lectures, of this theme of hosting the stranger, until I have oddly become a stranger even to myself. I mean a stranger in the sense that my own poems insist in moving in a direction other than what I would have supposed or hoped. At 69, I would have thought I would be reaching something like the penumbra of some paradiso, the palm at the end of the mind, a kind of contentment such as I feel in my life each day. But the poems I have been writing seem in fact stranger and stranger to their own creator. Of course, there is precedence for this among my rabbis. Yeats, finding himself in death as that Irish hero surrounded by strangers knitting shrouds, cowards, all of them, as I suspect Yeats feared at heart he might be after all, after the trials of the Easter 1916 uprising, for instance, which saw the leaders lined up against the wall in Dublin Castle and shot. Or Hart Crane, in the bell tower that spring of 1932, pulling lustily at the rope and wondering who at the last he might summon to his Orphic songs. Or Eliot, as late as Little Gidding, being advised by the compound familiar ghost on the streets of wartime London, after the screaming German Stukas, those bat-like dark doves, had fired their Pentecostal machine gun rounds into the heart of London, advised him of what the dreadful options for his future and ours might look like. Some 30 years ago, I tried on an experiment. Go down into yourself, a friend had advised. Down and down in your electric Kool-Aid acid Art Deco elevator, down to gamma level, wherever gamma was, and see who might be waiting at the door to greet you. So he put me under a light hypnotic trance, and I proceeded down the tunnel. A short time later, as short times go, the elevator door opened, and I saw someone standing there, someone who at first I did not recognize. Actually, I had half expected one of my old friends I had written of, Father Hopkins, or Bill Williams, or Robert Lowell, or John Berryman, or Hart Crane. Or if not them, Stevens, or Frost, or, as on my earlier trip, my father driving his payloader across some old cemetery. Instead, there was a tallish man standing there in clothes dating back to the 1850s. He had a 5 o'clock shadow, it seemed, and his eyes glowed amber. He seemed to be in his mid-40s. Who was it? My friend asked. Baudelaire, I said. Charles Baudelaire, the French poet. And the shit's on because I don't know French. Is he speaking? He asked. He was, but his lips weren't moving, which made it all the stranger. What was he saying? Later I wrote down what he said, or what I thought he said, and netted the strangest poem I have ever been offered. Looking back now, I wish I might have cut the excess verbiage. Still, what I heard him say holds true. Clear your head, he advised, and pay attention to these presences who throng about you. They are friends, strange friends, true, whom one has directed here to you. Let the hyenas bare their fangs, snapping at what they do not understand. They have their appointed time, mon frère, as you have yours. Then ceased and faded back, was gone. The music of the dead, let us call it, in the land of the poem, where each step out into the white space of the paper remains uncertain and desired, an attempt to host the strangeness of language and the even deeper strangeness of what lies beyond the sound of words themselves. Keats's unheard melody revisited. William Carlos Williams's Jersey words floating down the Passaic towards the falls. A boy in the back seat of a 1937 Ford trying to make sense of what Paul and Louis, father and uncle, whose names are etched on him, and by which he has been summoned for the past 7 decades. A nameless woman, begging for consolation after visiting Hardy's doomed Titanic in a classroom on East 67th Street 40 years ago. And finally, a fish ladder at Damariscotta, visited last August in the town where Robert Lowell and Jean Stafford lived back in 1946, and the little church of St. Patrick's, the oldest of its name in the United States, founded by the Irish 200 years ago, signifying everything for Lowell, then less and less as he turned from his beloved Hopkins to his other more familiar doppelgangers, Jonathan Edwards, then Hawthorne, and finally Baudelaire. 5 poems then, all of them haunted by the discourses stirred up in the strange meetings here in Devlin Hall. The first is called Epitaph for the Journey. Miles Davis, cradling his Miles Davis, cradling his gleaming trumpet. 3 black jazzmen slouch like hipster guardian angels just behind him. Searing coals, those eyes, as they stare out from the photo at you. The jagged, blue-black mosaic shards of Justinian's eyes under the golden dome of San Apollinare, unblinking there these 1,500 years. Listen long enough, and you will hear the arpeggios those eyes attend to. Hart Crane, doomed pilgrim that he was, surely must have heard them. At least his songs report back that he did, descending from the giant harp he called a bridge. Lorca heard it too, his dear dark lady, moon-bright pupils facing that blind, unblinking firing squad. Father Hopkins refused our 4-bar player piano measures, listening hard instead for the strain of plain chant groaning off the stones of Delphi, and ancient music flaking down the Dead Sea cells of Qumran monks, or Monte Cassino's choir stalls before it disappeared into the vast and solid void. Others too, they say, have heard it in the timeless vortices of time. And now, if they have anything at all to tell me, it is this: my time, like yours, friend, is drawing to a close. My one good ear, dead since birth, the other closing down that much more each month. Most go about their business day by day. They keep their heads down or learn to simply wait. Here and there, someone points or gestures here or there. Unheard melodies, Keats called them, eyes ablaze, then dimming as his body fell apart. Once, my own eyes blazed, but that was then. Too late, someone else is singing. Too late. But the high-flung bells, if anyone can or cares to hear them, keep choiring in the haunted, risen wind. The second one is called Elegy for William Carlos Williams on the eve of his 125th birthday, a poem which I wrote in a Paisanos, the restaurant where he was having dinner. I could see his house across the street. A chic Italian restaurant here on Rutherford's Park Avenue. On the corner across the street, your home, sold to strangers. All those bright flowers you and Flossie tended to in your backyard gone. A piece of still warm bread and a bottle of Chianti I had to bring myself. It's a dry town still, where the mythic gods of wine stay suspect, Bill. A blue flame gutters my lonely table. I ask the waitress, first name Cora, who's worked here the past 4 years, if she's ever heard of you. A poet, you know, one of those. Spent his whole life here in this godforsaken Jersey suburb, long before the stadium came to nest in the purple cattailed meadows. Coaxed 3,000 kids into this new world naked, making endless calls in these same ramshackle 4-square rooms, leaving poems at every railroad crossing as he knitted isolate flecks of images from the sick, majestic river that runs through town, heading for the black Atlantic to be lost. A poet, huh? She says, in that distinctive twang my poor mother had in life. Right here in this old town, well, I'll be damned, as we all are, don't you know, with our broken cries and words. Again, the dark descends as she leads me to my cell. Except for the bells, you were never one for Catholic rituals, old friend. But let me ring one in tonight. A crust of bread here in my left hand, and a glass of Dago red here in my right, which now I lift to you, listening as you taught me with the one good ear I've left for the river's sad and distant music, riffing with those jagged Jersey sounds you love so well. Maresy Dotes. Remember that song, Maresy Dotes and Dozy Dotes and Little... Okay. My name is Paul Louis Mariani, and so, I carry around that name, Paul Louis. And there's my father and there's my uncle from whom I take the names, okay? They're both gone, but I still carry that heritage with me, Maresy Dotes. Rewind, recording angel, and play again the roll and rise of Maresy Dotes. The lilt and lift of those honeyed voices soothing to a small boy in the back seat listening. The Andrews sisters and Dozy Dotes. The whole harmonium of bird notes floating from the radio of my father's all-black pre-war Ford those 60 years ago. They make no sense, the syllables that sing Little Lambsy Divey. And yet, angel, how they terrify and comfort. Behind the wheel, my father's laughing at something his brother riding shotgun, a cigarette clenched between his gleaming teeth, has said. They're making jokes of words which I can no more understand than the song the Trinity of Sisters sang. Down the wobbling vortex of memory, the wheels go round and round, bumping over New York's ancient cobbled streets. From above, the latticed gaps of the 3rd Avenue L as shuttered sunlight flickers. Where we've gone or where we're going, I cannot tell. Nor can I now recall a word of what they said then, angel, though you know that I was there. Only splintered sounds sloughing on the summer air and laughter like a shattered symphony, forming and reforming. Paul to the left, Louis to the right. Those two whose names I carry with me everywhere I go. Names by which the self is fated to be blessed and cursed, recalled by flickers, if at all. 3 bird notes by which the soul is summoned. Mares eat oats, and does eat oats, and little lambs eat ivy. The nursling music reconfigures to reveal at last a meaning for the boy, which tells him only this, that the animals were hungry and had been fed. Up front, there's that mix of English and Italian laced with French, the odd patois their parents brought with them when they left Compiano. And now, in memory's rearview mirror, after all this time, I catch my father's beseeching eyes dart in my direction from death's shadows, while Louis, 60 anni fa, turns towards me as if to let me in on something he's just said. But there's too much clack and static, as now his head falls back on his pillow in the casket. And that's it. That's all I can recover. The flecked film frozen in blacks and whites and sepias, like some Roman ruin crumbling on a darkling plain over which the waves of time are lashing. 2 shadows only, caught on this cloudy moonlit midnight here by the cold July Atlantic, like the changing light of that overarching L, and I alone left to tell this story in which their names are entered. These 2 who follow me everywhere I go, answering still, as mares and does and lambs answer when they're called, by force of awe or fear or love or hunger, hoping to be fed. Oh yes, angel, hoping to be fed. And finally, this is a poem called Eurydice. We're in New York again, but we're 20 years later. A Winter's Tale. I was teaching up at Hunter, a night class, 1966 or 7, mostly stenographers and clerks, with 9-to-5 jobs somewhere in Manhattan or the boroughs. Introduction to poetry and prose, the 101 variety. That evening it was Thomas Hardy. Hap, the darkling thrush, the convergence of the twain. The appointed iceberg peeling the skin off the Titanic like some sardine can. Bleak and heady stuff for a bleak and heady time. Nam, napalm, race riots, Agent Orange, the whole shebang. And I was on that night. My best imitation Orphic voice, rhapsodizing on blind necessity and fate, the marriage of a massive ship, state of the art, with some far more massive iceberg. Hardy's hope seemed a hollow thing in the face of so much suffering, as I suppose he wanted it to pale for the poem he was writing. No one to blame, no grand design, no god or gods, no anything but a rolling of blind dice. I preened myself. After all, I was 26 and understood the mossy myths, dark and cold, that have told us since before the Greeks how the world really works. And then the time was up and the students gathered up their things and headed out. I was packing my books and the papers I would have to grade back in our small apartment out in Flushing, where I lived with my wife and 2 small sons, trying to finish my degree against the odds. It was late, past 10, and the wind blowing down the cold corridors of New York. I meant to head straight for the subway round the corner to begin the long ride home on the RRT, which, along with other huddled masses, would take me there. I looked up to see a woman standing by my desk, neither young nor old, one of my students, as nameless as the rest. She seemed shaken and her face was pale. "You're a good man," she was saying. "Tell me you don't believe the things you said tonight. Tell me you believe there is a God." Now understand, this was outre and unprofessional on her part, almost comic, except she looked as if I'd robbed her. And for what it matters, I did subscribe to something like a creed, or thought I did. But we were talking poetry here, and this was New York City, not some Potomville. I assured her my own beliefs had nothing to do with it. These were Hardy's gifts to us, the poems written out of a world he had suffered. True, he wasn't everyone's cup of tea, a brilliant use of language, I warmed myself by thinking, and the skeptic's view was something she might sip on, a way of adding to the available stock of reality we are heir to. I turned towards the elevator and bowed goodnight, then walked quickly down the long, cold corridors and past the guard out onto Lexington, then down into the subway, repeating Hardy's lines about how the imminent will that stirs and urges everything prepared a sinister mate for her. The place was almost empty at that hour, and I already at the turnstile, when I saw her following at a distance, her lips moving with the cold. I'm hard of hearing, and the train was already entering the station, so I tried to read her lips. "Please," her eyes were saying above the racket of the place. "You're a good man. Tell me you believe." Eurydice, I thought, drowning in a hell of her own making, pallid and accusing, and I some unwitting Orpheus. "For Christ's sake," this to myself and then to her, "I do believe, okay? I do, even if just then I felt nothing but annoyance, and to tell the truth, a touch of icy terror. Please, go home, it's late. Everything's okay." A gesture only, comforting someone who needed to be comforted. She smiled weakly, a nervous smile, as if she just avoided a collision with something looming out there, immense and cold, and backed upstairs to greet the vast and open void as the doors closed after me. What in hell had I just done? I thought, hanging from a strap, the weary, deadened faces all about me. What was this, some operatic scene by Gluck? How badly had I just compromised myself, I wondered, then turned to catch 2 amber lights and a skull dangling from a strap across the aisle as the train went hurtling down the sullen rails, lugging each of us as it happens to our appointed destination. Thank you very much.